everybody. I'm actually doing this live. I decided I really didn't want to record something. And so feel free if you have questions. Hopefully this will be short enough that there will be time for a few questions. But I'm going to talk about a long-term insect monitoring project, the Monarch Larva Monitoring Project, which started at the University of Minnesota 25 years ago in my lab, and is now jointly run by the Monarch Joint Venture and the UW-Madison Arboretum. And just a really quick introduction to monarch biology, just because all the monitoring makes sense when you know the biology. What I've shown here is the annual cycle of monarch butterflies, and I'm going to start where we are right now in the spring. So most of the monarchs that are around right now have come up from Mexico. They overwintered in Mexico, and they've moved north into the southern United States and are laying eggs on new milkweed plants and getting nectar. And the offspring of these butterflies will begin the summer generation that moves into the northern part of the United States, breeds there for 2 to 3 generations, and then the final generation of the year migrates back to Mexico in the fall, getting nectar along the way and stopping at nighttime. And then they get to overwintering sites in the middle of Mexico where they spend the winter hanging out in trees. So we have 1 generation that does the fall, winter, and spring, and then 3 generations up here that do the summer. And I'm in Madison, Wisconsin right now. There has not been a monarch reported in Wisconsin yet, but there will be really soon, maybe today. So the Monarch Larva Monitoring Project is focused on eggs and caterpillars of monarchs on milkweed. But I do want to point out that this project is one of many that focus on monarch butterflies. So just like they were talking about birds, lots and lots of bird projects, all of these projects are focused on a single species of insect. So here's a long, long list right here of a lot of different projects. But basically the point here is that there are monarch monitoring programs that monitor every single stage of this annual cycle that I just talked to you about. And so now I'm going to switch to just focusing on the Monarch Larva Monitoring Project, or Mlmp. This project is done in sites that the only requirement is that they have to have milkweed. They can be gardens, parks, roadside prairies. You can see behind me on my screen a really great Mlmp site, lots and lots of milkweed in that site. So people go out and look at their milkweed plants and see if they see any eggs or caterpillars on them and report them. They do that weekly, and we also have the option for people to turn in non-site reports. So reports that are just anecdotal observations. So I think that's an interesting thing to think about when you're developing a monitoring network, is if you want to have the same sites monitored year after year, week after week, or if you'll just take reports from anywhere. So we decided to add non-site reports, but it's an interesting decision to be made. And people monitor weekly for this project. This is the scope of it. We have well over 1,000 sites that are monitored. A lot of our volunteers have multiple sites. You can see that it's focused in the eastern half of the United States, where we have what we call the eastern migratory population. But we have a lot of sites in the west too, and these butterflies in the western US migrate to sites along the coast of California. Like I said, it's 25 years old. We had 25 sites the first year, and 6 of those are still being monitored. So the main data that we get from this project are densities of monarch eggs and caterpillars. And I'm just showing you, these data can be visualized for either states or individual sites. So here we have data from Wisconsin in 2019. All the different colors on this stacked bar graph show the different stages of monarchs. And we see this first generation coming out of the south, and then this is kind of a combination of generations 3 and 4 right here. And these are the ones that'll migrate down to Mexico. But we get interesting comparisons from year to year. So here was a really interesting year for monarchs, 2012. We always hope we don't see that again, where they came back really early, You can see they're about a month earlier this year, really high densities in the beginning, and then the population just crashed. So with more years of data, we're really able to tell a lot about what's going on with the population. Here's what we had last year. We had low numbers in the beginning coming out of the southern US, but then fairly average numbers with those second and third generations later on. So one of the things that I think is really interesting to think about with citizen monitoring projects is the educational benefits of the program. I think that's something you want to build into it right away. There's the obvious benefit of engaging people in authentic science, data collection, but also there's the connections to nature that people get from these kinds of observations and the data themselves. So we've been really conscious of that with the Mlmp to provide the data in ways that educators can use them, so people can download data. So this is representing some of the data that I just showed you. They can download these into formats that they could use with their students to make graphs and analyze the data in ways that they're interested in. There's also a lot of conservation benefits in terms of human capital. We know from several studies that people that engage in these kinds of projects have an increased concern about nature and habitat. And we've also found in a study that a graduate student and I conducted a few years ago, that when they engage in these projects, they not only are concerned, but they do other things as well. So things that aren't necessarily directly related to the project that they're part of. So lots of benefits. So now I'm going to shift really quickly here into some of the nuts and bolts of this project. I know that maybe some of you will monitor monarchs, so this would be relevant, but I think it's interesting to think about this as you're developing other projects as well. So we have with this project several different activities that people can do. They describe their site, they measure the density of milkweed or the host plant of monarchs at their site, and then can do a whole bunch of different activities that are basically optional. They can do as much as they want. And I'm going to talk about two of these really briefly, measuring monarch density and then estimating the survival of the caterpillars. Okay, so to measure monarch density, we think carefully through the skills people need when they're doing this. And this is something, because this is a 25-year-old project, we've had a lot of time to think about this and kind of tweak how we teach these skills and how much we expect people to know. But record keeping is a really important thing. You'd be surprised at the weird data we get sometimes when people haven't really thought about how to keep records. In our project, they record the data in the field for later online entry. We've kind of went down the road of having an in the field app for them to use, but it just became too complicated. And a lot of our volunteers really prefer bringing pieces of paper out into the field. They have to be able to recognize milkweed, so we give them resources for that. I've shown a bunch of kinds of milkweed around here. And they have to be able to identify monarch life stages, eggs and caterpillars for this project. So we teach them how to identify the different stages of the monarchs. Here's a little egg, and they have to be able to identify these different larval instars because we do a lot of survival studies with their data. So it's actually not that hard to teach them how to tell these apart from size and other characteristics. So that's a skill that we've carefully thought how to teach them. And then we tell them what's a site. People want to know if they can go out and monitor just one milkweed plant. They can, but it's really not all that interesting. So we say it's nice to have 10 or more plants for their site. But as you can see from behind me, it's actually not that hard to find a site with lots and lots of milkweed. And then they need materials. They need the data sheets, at least in the beginning, to help them organize their data. It's helpful to have a hand lens so that they can see things up close. And there are identification aids that they need. We give them a set of cards so they can identify the stages and different tools that we've developed. And this all comes in a kit. So we've put together a kit of the materials that make it easier for them, all in one kit. And I've just also shown in here different kinds of people that are involved in our projects. My husband used to say to me, most of your volunteers are little old ladies in sneakers. So this is an example of a little old lady in sneakers. I'm getting to be a little old lady in sneakers myself now. So I'm joining the crew, but also it's used in college classes and high school classes as well. Here's a backyard site, but it can be a site like the one behind me in the screen, or the field where these two people are standing. And then for this activity, what they do is they go out into the field, monitor as many milkweed plants as possible. They can either monitor all of the plants in an area. That doesn't work very well in a field like the one I'm showing you on the bottom of the screen. So we tell them ways to select plants randomly, tell them not to just pick the best looking plants. So we teach them how to do a transect. That's, I think, a really important skill to think about as your sampling procedure. They can either do a transect, and for some people, they just choose to monitor the same area of their field every week. So we give them that option of how to choose the plants to monitor. And they just keep track of the number of plants that they monitor and the eggs and caterpillars that they see on them. The other project, and if any of you do this and you're at some kind of a visitor center, this is something that really engages the public, is bringing in caterpillars to see if they survive. So this is our third activity in the project, Monarch Survival. People collect eggs and caterpillars from the wild. They rear them individually and record the outcome, whether they get a monarch adult or it dies or a parasitoid comes out of it. So we've learned a lot about parasitoids. If you've been following insect conservation news or monarch news, there probably are some risks to rearing monarchs inside. It could change their behavior. So we really let people know that this is for science. They're rearing a few, but some of these monarchs might be affected by being reared inside and might not migrate normally. So we have lots of resources, and I think I wanted to end here with thinking about what are the, how do you convey the information to people about how to do the project? Because while we do a lot of in-person trainings, and we've been doing with COVID a lot of webinars like this, day-long webinars where we teach people to do this, it's really important to have a repository of the information that's needed to successfully do the project, whatever it is. So on our project website, which is now hosted at the Monarch Joint Venture, we have links, how to get started. People can link there, and there's a lot of clear information on how to get started, how to get updates from us. They can sign up for newsletters, and they can see the results, all sorts of information. And one of the things that we developed a few years ago that's been really useful to us is a library of online training resources. We've identified sort of regional experts who have been doing the Mlmp for a long time. Because we're spread out over so many states, we've identified regional experts who can lead trainings in their areas, but for people that for some reason or another don't have access to an in-person training, we do an online training series which has a whole bunch of short videos. We decided that people don't really have an attention span to sit down and watch a long video. So we broke this into, I think the longest one of these is 6 minutes long, and a lot of them are like 3 or fewer minutes long. So this is all of the things people need to learn to do the project. We're going to actually add one on data entry because we don't have one there right now on how to enter data, but that turns out to be something that is complicated and you really need to think through carefully. So all of these videos are available. And when people ask, send in questions to our info@ line, it's really handy to just send them a link to one of these videos so we don't have to say the same thing over and over. So with that, one of the reasons I wanted to do this in person is in case people had questions. And I know Hollis said there wouldn't be questions, but she didn't know I was only going to take 15 minutes. So if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Otherwise, again, I'm happy to answer questions later by email, but it would be fun for me to hear some actual in-person questions if there are any, or comments.
Karen, I totally agree, and I'm very impressed with your timing. And yeah, if folks want to ask some questions in the chat, and Brianne and I can be keeping an eye on them, and I can scroll through too to see if I saw anything that folks have during the presentation.
Okay.
Let's see.
And I'm going to turn this off so I can see them too.
I think you can only see the panelists.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're still learning how the whole webinar thing works. Anybody have any questions for Karen? If you type in the chat, we will ask it.
Yeah, I can actually see the chat.
Oh, okay, right.
Yeah, and that, Hillary, that's a really good point, is the permits that you need for your project, which a lot is from state by state. And we've been talking, and I should have mentioned that. I'm sorry I didn't. If you're in California, you can't rear monarchs. Any other state, it is possible. So we're communicating with our California Mlmp volunteers to clarify that they can't rear monarchs in California.
Mm-hmm. We have a lot of extra rules here.
Yeah.
Oh, Serena has a question in there, Karen, if you can see it.
Yeah. How have Mlmp data been used, especially in species conservation? Great question. Thanks a lot, Serena. Good to know that you're back there. So yeah, the data have been used. We've actually had about a lot of papers published using the Mlmp data. So Mlmp data have been used for basic kind of status updates of the population. And also they've been used in studies to show when we think of that complicated annual cycle of monarchs and the way that we have basically sort of this 4-part annual cycle. Mlmp data and data from a lot of these other monitoring projects have been used to identify sort of the touch points, the parts of that annual cycle that are drivers of the rest of it. So from Mlmp data and other analyses, we've learned that that the breeding stage is really important. So that the breeding stage is a driver for numbers in Mexico, for example. It looks like it's not the migration and it's not survival in Mexico that drives numbers, but it's breeding. So that's been the most important way we've used the data. It's kind of 2 ways, to kind of assess the status of the population and to assess where the drivers are during that cycle. Surveys of volunteers. Here's a question. Can you tell us about surveys of volunteers? How do you figure out their education needs? So that's a really great question. We have surveyed our volunteers a lot. We've surveyed them to find out things that motivate them to volunteer. How do we keep them engaged? That's so important to, understanding why they do what they do, because you want them to keep doing it. So what motivates them, how they use the project, and then how the project, how it affects their behavior in many ways. So those are kind of the 3 main ways that we've surveyed them. And the education needs, we mostly have focused for this on teachers, because from the very beginning, this project, we connected with a lot of teachers. So we talked about that. One of the things that teachers are really interested in is teaching their students how to use data, how to make graphs, how to interpret graphs. So that's why we have something on our website about how to read a bar graph. So we've really, the educational surveys have been mostly with teacher users of the project. And mostly the broad surveys have been more about motivation and, what they would like to know, what information they want from us to keep them engaged.